nationally known guy who worked in helped San Francisco change their mode share really.
Oh, nice.
And
recording stopped.
And there was a person that this was in person. It was probably 2019, and this person came so rude to him in front of everybody, and so that person removed.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, that's we are able to remove people if we need to. So
yeah, sure.
Have a little bit of control over it.
Gotcha.
Hi, folks. Those of you that are joining us, we're just going to give it a few more minutes here. It's 3:28, and I believe we have a little over 40 people that are registered to participate today. So we will give it a few moments before we get started. For those of you that just joined us, we're just going to give it a few more minutes. We have just over 40 folks registered for today, so I'm just trying to wait and give everyone a chance to join us before we get started. Okay. What do you think, Megan? Maybe another minute? Yeah, okay. Oh, there we go.
Maybe we are going to lose some people because it's such a beautiful day.
I know, it's beautiful out. Good point. It's nice to have the sunshine. Okay, folks, I'm going to give it maybe one more minute here and we'll get started. We have some folks slowly kind of dripping in here. Okay, we've got 20 people. Expecting.
Yeah, Danielle, I think you're okay. There's nobody else in the waiting room right now. So
okay.
I'll keep an eye on that.
Okay, yeah.
Go ahead.
We got one more in there, but yeah. All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. It is absolutely beautiful with all the sun shining in. So maybe as Megan said, we may have lost a few folks to the sun today. My name is Danielle Kroll. I am a senior transportation planner with the SMTC, Syracuse Metropolitan Transportation Council. Some of you folks have been attending our meetings all along for our forum on active transportation. I think the first year we did it in 2020-ish, I believe. We had 3 meetings and 3 to 4 meetings a year we're holding. We're trying to do these quarterly. So for anyone that's new, just to let you know and remind you if you didn't see it as you joined, our meeting is being recorded. And it will also be posted on our YouTube channel following the meeting. If you prefer to participate in the meeting that way, you are more than welcome to attend via that route. The only thing you won't be able to do if you watch from YouTube is you won't be able to ask questions throughout the meeting. We don't have that set up. Let's see what else. If you're having any technical issues, we've got our contact information right there on the screen. And again, everybody is muted and you won't be able to unmute yourself until we request that you unmute yourself. And that's just to kind of, once we have more than a handful of folks, it's just to help us keep the meeting moving and reduce the background noise we have going on. So, all right, here we go. So for our, let's see. Oh, now it's not letting me forward. There we go. So as far as staff introductions go, I'm going to just give a quick introduction of the SMTC staff that we have on the line. And to save time, we've got the list of participants that you can see on the screen. So I introduced myself, Danielle Kroll. Megan Vitale is our principal planner with SMTC. We also have Mario Colon, who's our program manager. He's on today. And we also have Tom Bardenett with us today. He's a senior transportation planner with us as well. And did I miss any of our staff? I think we have the Let's see. I think I got everybody that's on. I may have missed one or two. They can yell at me later. All right, we still have some folks coming in. Great. Okay. So let's see. Let me move my screen here. I apologize. Okay. As far as meeting controls and meeting expectations go, I'll get to those in just a second. We'll have our staff updates that we usually do for SMTC, projects and planning projects that we are working on here as an agency. We've got some member agency folks that are with us today, and we will get some updates from them. We have a presentation today from Eric Hathaway, PE with City of Ithaca. He's the Director of Parking and Transportation there. He's going to talk to us again about Vision Zero. We'll have a good chunk of time for Q&A and discussion. We can ask, we'll ask our questions of Eric then, and then usually we like to wait until the end of the meeting for folks to ask questions, and then we'll address questions that you have submitted ahead of time or comments that you have submitted ahead of time. We'll get to those at that portion of the meeting as well. And then any other topics or concerns we want to chat about, we can do that then as well. And then we'll have our little closing where we're going to ask everyone to, if they've got any ideas for other topic discussions for future meetings. So that's kind of the overview of our meeting today. Oh, let's get in here. Again, meeting controls. I'm sure most of you are familiar with this. If you need any help with meeting controls in Zoom, if you go to the SMTC website, smtcmpo.org, you can go to the public participation tab, and we've got some information there on how Zoom works. And also, if you're calling in, there's some specific controls you'll need. I don't believe we have anyone calling in, but if you're having issues with that, you can certainly email us at contact us. And then just a reminder, I know folks are pretty used to Zoom meetings and the like lately. If everyone could just be respectful of one another, that's all we ask. So we really appreciate that. I'm having trouble forwarding my presentation. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to get started, unless Megan, if there's anything I need to stop for, I'm going to get started with our SMTC staff updates. Basically what we do here is I share some updates on some of the bike ped related planning projects that we at SMTC are working on and that we have going on right now. One of the projects that we have is kind of organized under a general bike ped planning task. And through that, we are able to do a lot of little, I guess you'd say more minor planning projects, depending on what the task at hand is. One of these right now, and I don't recall if I mentioned this at our last COAT meeting in December, but we are in the process of doing a very minor update to our bike suitability map, and we hope to have those in hand again on weatherproof paper, May-June timeframe. Minor update meaning we're not changing, we're not completely entirely redoing the bike suitability scores themselves, but we're updating bike lanes, sharrows, trails that have been completed and fully constructed since our last map, which was printed in 2020. So we'll have a few new trails and other bike facilities updated on there. So look for that to arrive in May-June timeframe. I think we ordered 7,500 maps. So we'll have some lovely weatherproof maps to share with everyone again. Another item that falls under this task are these meetings here, quarterly FOAT meetings. And we also participate in statewide bike ped working group and safety working groups. And that basically allows us to meet with our sister agencies across the state and talk about a lot of different topics relating to bicycle pedestrian planning, safety planning. We've also got, a GIS working group, which is Geographic Information Systems, our computer mapping folks that meet together. And we're able to share a lot of ideas, and we're able to do a lot of trainings together. And actually, one of those such trainings is happening tomorrow here in Syracuse. We've got a transit training that we're holding here along with other MPOs. So that should be really interesting and exciting. And some members of the city of Syracuse and Central will be part of that as well. And another item this year that we have going on in May is our MPO conference is being held here in Syracuse. And that will include folks from MPOs across the state, as well as some of our local New York State DOT, City of Syracuse, Onondaga County DOT folks, if they are so inclined. Another project, this project actually just wrapped up here, the Manlius Village Mobility Study. We presented a draft report and concepts to the public in December at a village board meeting in Manlius. And you can see on the screen there what some of those concepts included. That report is also on the SMTC website right now, so you're welcome to take a look through there. In January, we had posted the draft final report for public review, and we addressed the comments then. And then our SMTC policy committee acknowledged that report is complete in February. So that study is now complete. And again, it's on our website if you'd like to check that out. Now, the next several projects, SMTC started up pretty much summer, fall time of last year, 2022. We've got the Onondaga Nation Nedrow Route 11 corridor study that's taking a look at Route 11 through Nedrow and Onondaga Nation. And the major goals of that project are to enhance that area for bus, bike, and pedestrian use, and of course, improve safety there. And again, Onondaga Nation's involved in that study. We have so far to date completed the existing conditions assessment, and that is going to include a future build out and capacity analysis. There are 2 SAC meetings that have already taken place, and the first public outreach for that project will be coming up this spring, April or May. We've also got our Cold Brook Creek Trail study that Tom with SMTC is working on. They conducted a survey which garnered 113 responses, which is pretty good. We have attended 2 public forums to discuss that project. Some of the draft concepts were presented to the SAC in February, and then those were updated and then presented to a stakeholder group in early March. And those concepts include an off-road path, use of greenway techniques, pedestrian lighting, informational signage, and staff is currently working on the draft report to be shared with the SAC later this spring. And the SAC is our study advisory committee. Those consist primarily of member agencies, SMTC staff, and the like. We've also got our Westfield Plaza area pedestrian and bicycle mobility analysis project. For that project, over the last, since we last met with this vote, staff has assisted with data gathering efforts for a RAISE grant application that the town of Geddes is putting together. And that RAISE grant looks to promote complete streets developments within the study area. And those application materials will be reviewed to inform potential future recommendations in our study as well. The second SAC meeting for that project is going to be held the end of March. And we have taken a look at potential changes to land use and zoning policies in the study area. And that bullet is supposed to say staff drafted redevelopment concepts, not rafted. And trip generation and intersection capacity analyses were also conducted. And the first public engagement opportunity for that project will be scheduled for later this spring as well. Again, these next couple of projects that I'm talking about kind of all started up at the same time. We've got some similar schedule for public engagement coming online here. West Side Trail City of Syracuse study, that builds off previously completed South Geddes and West Fayette Complete Streets Review project. We're taking a look at the potential for off-road trails to connect West Side neighborhoods. And then we're also looking at potential on-street connections where we aren't able to make those off-road connections. The existing conditions assessment is just about finished up, and we're working on issues, opportunities, and developing initial concepts for that project. Our second SAC will be held in April, and then also with this project, public outreach starting later this spring, and we're planning to do that through the West Side TNT group. Excuse me. Okay. So let's see, member agency updates. So this is where I get to call on some of our member agencies to share with us what they have going on. Let me take a look at who we've got in the house. Julie, are you ready? Okay, we'll have Megan unmute, request you to unmute. And okay, Julie, oh, sorry. Julie is with New York State Department of Transportation. And if Julie, if you could share some updates with us, we'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure. You can hear me all right?
Yep, can hear you just fine.
Great. So it's been winter, so we haven't really been doing much construction for a couple months here. But as far as other things, we've been doing some different planning efforts. We are working on revising the Complete Streets checklist. That's a document that kind of implements some of the Complete Streets bill for New York State with state and federally funded projects and the state system and on the local system if that's the funding source. So it's been about 10 years almost since we did the last draft, and we're working on the revision. So maybe later this year we'll have that out. And we're also working on our active transportation plan. This is a document I wasn't here when we did it the first time in the late 90s or early 2000s. So it's pretty out of date at this point. So we've just hired a consultant to update that plan. We're going to have a kickoff meeting later this spring, and I'm hoping to have some updates for you guys next time we meet. And that's it.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Julie. Just a reminder too, for those of you that maybe missed us at the beginning, if you've got questions for our member agencies as they speak today, and you can hold on to them till the end, that's great. If you want to throw them into the chat, we'll also make sure that we scroll back and we get to those at the end of our meeting when it's time for Q&A. So, all right, let's see. Megan, did you tell me that Chris, I don't know if he's in.
I know that Neil and Kevin from the city are on.
Okay.
Chris Rover is trying to log in.
Okay. So Neil or Kevin, why can't I find you?
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes, yeah. Thanks, Neil. Neil
Thanks for finding me.
Thank you. Neil's with the city of Syracuse. He's the director of special projects for the Department of Public Works.
Thanks, Danielle, and everyone.
Sure.
Happy to be here. Great topic today, Eric. Good to see you. So in terms of updates on the city side, we are gearing up to chart our course towards Vision Zero. This is a declaration that came from the administration during the State of the City. And where we are right now is we're in the information gathering stage. We're taking a look at what other communities have done, and we're going to chart our road towards Vision Zero. There's going to be a lot of information coming our way. There'll be information that we put out towards the public. So there's a lot more on that front for everyone to stay tuned. But yeah, we're in the very beginning stages of that. So on top of that, or semi-related, we are formalizing our striping plan for the season, which should have a good amount of new bike lanes going in on city-owned streets, and that will be shared ideally in Bike Month. We're working on the plans now and double checking everything. So that's one item. And then the next would be the city's move from City Hall Commons to a new office space a few blocks away at One Park Place, which is on the edge of the Firefighters Memorial Park, right along the connective corridor. And as a part of that, we are engaging with Centro to come to an agreement to provide no fare rides for city employees, and not just the ones who work downtown, but that's part of it. We want to encourage alternative mode share, and moving to a new office without a parking lot next to it is a really good way to encourage some folks to try out Centro. And we're having those conversations now, which is very interesting. They offer a lot of services, trip training and real-time info and lots of fun stuff. So we've got a lot of things cooking on our end, but we'll be happy to report back more on those, hopefully at the next vote and via press releases and everything else. So thanks. And I'll turn it over to, I believe the county might be up next.
See, yes, let me see if, I think we may have Megan, that may be Chris that called in, but I'm not positive.
I think so. Yes.
Okay.
He was looking for the link.
Okay.
Give him a second.
All right, let's see. If we can. I might have to remind him here.
I'll have to ask him.
Okay. And so we're going to have, in just a second here, we'll have Chris Rauber with the Onondaga County Department of Transportation. He's a civil engineer there. And I think
I think he's unmuted. Yep.
Okay. I think you might have to press *6, Chris, in order to.
Can you hear me?
Yep, we can. Perfect.
Perfect.
Awesome. Well, nothing like joining the meeting and you're up. If you've got any bike ped related projects going on right now with the county that you want to fill us in on, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, and our biggest project, I mentioned at one of our last meetings, is the Loop the Lake project. Yeah. We're trying to get this last segment designed and built. It's a long, lengthy process with having to, deal with all the environmental issues and contamination type issues, and obviously the eagles, the roosting area. So it's very sensitive, but yeah, we're working through the design process on that now. We're trying to choose an alignment at this point and get through all the environmental stuff, but we're probably looking at 2026 or 2027 before we can build it, having to deal with CSX as well. So that I can answer any specific questions on that, but it's probably one of the hardest projects we've done in terms of having to deal with so many different entities and having to deal with the issues on the ground that we're dealing with. So it's tough, but we're just trying to navigate through it. We have several road projects that we always look to incorporate bike and pedestrian facilities into. We have several federally funded projects that are on minor and principal arterials. We have our Old Liverpool road project, which is one that's hopefully we're going to actually put out the construction for next year. At worst case, it would be the following year, but we're looking to add sidewalk essentially from Electronics Parkway all the way down to Buckley Road. And that it's a busy corridor, but somewhat residential too as well. So we're looking to advance that project, and we're working with several entities, including the town, just to let them know what we're doing. But so that one's in process. We also have the two Buckley Road projects. Actually, one is started already. It's Buckley Road between Hopkins and Taft, and so we're just starting the design on that one, as well as a few others where we're looking to incorporate bike lanes and sidewalk where we can within where we have the right of way.
Great.
That one, as well as other new ones, are Route 57 Sewell area. Not that intersection, but a little bit beyond in both directions on 57. We're looking at Onondaga Boulevard from Velasco Road out to possibly the school, West Hills High School, or a little beyond, where it makes sense
Right.
to put these facilities in. We're looking at 7th North Street from Electronics Parkway to the city line. That's a long stretch there. Looking at the feasibility of that and if it makes sense. And I believe the last one we have that's in design right now is Bear Road between essentially Allen Road and Route 11. There's a school, I think Allen Road Elementary is in that segment of roadway, and some residential there. So we're looking at how we can tie that into Route 11 where there are sidewalks now. And of course we have our ongoing maintenance paving, which mostly paves, but we do find instances where it makes sense to put some sidewalk in or do some work there as well. So always something cooking. We're working on several things. So
great. Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Chris, for the update, and we'll be looking forward to updates on all of those fun projects coming down the line too. So thanks for the time. Appreciate it.
Yep. Sure.
Okay, so let's see with that. I'm going to go back to sharing my screen for just a second here. So what we have, again, for folks just joining, if you've got questions for our member agencies or comments for our member agencies, you can put those in the chat or just hold them until after our main presentation here. That way we can make sure we get we've got our member agency updates. We want to make sure we give Eric enough time to share his presentation that he's going to share with us. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Eric. He is the professional engineer and director of parking and transportation with the city of Ithaca. And he is here today to share with us about Vision Zero. So this is pretty timely with the mayor making the announcement at the State of the City address. And so let's see, I'll stop my share screen, and Eric, we'll have you go ahead and share your screen. We'll make sure we get everything up and running here. And when you're ready, we'll just have, yep, there you go.
Sure. I just got to wait for the
slideshow to, yeah.
Yeah, well, there's a thing on the top of the screen from Zoom. I have to wait for that to go away, and then I can do that.
Gotcha. No problem. No problem.
Meanwhile, I can just start talking in case that doesn't go away. Let me just make sure it'll progress as it is. Yeah, worst case scenario, we can just go with that.
Sure.
Yeah, so thanks everybody for having me. I think you'll find I'm kind of conversational in my tone and how I'll do this presentation. Welcome any questions at the end. Usually I like to take them as we go, but that's kind of hard to do over Zoom. So we'll just, like Danielle said before. But I'm here to just share our experience in Ithaca with Vision Zero, because it sounds like in Syracuse, things are, like Neil mentioned, just kind of at the beginning stages. And I can remember when I was there, and due to the last few years with COVID, we haven't made as much progress as we had hoped to by now. But I think we've got some things that are valuable to share about what we've done and where we're going. And then, of course, the conversations and the follow-up will probably be the most valuable part. So, oh man, I just can't get to the screen up here. Oh, wait, here. Sorry. Here we go. If I do it this way. There we go. Is that better? Okay. So with that, I'll do the thing. I'll start off with the thing you never do, which is read every word on a slide. But I think this one's actually helpful because this is the beginning. And I won't take for granted that everybody knows even what Vision Zero is on this conversation. There's quite a lot of people here. So let me start with what it is in its essence. So it's a strategy to eliminate all traffic fatalities and severe injuries while increasing safe, healthy, equitable mobility for all. And there's three basic tenets. There's leadership and commitment, safe roadways and safe speeds, and a data-driven approach, transparency and accountability. So just want to start with what it is and what it isn't. I mean, it started in Scandinavia in the 90s, I believe. And that's where, I mean, quantifiably, I guess you could say they've had the most success there. Oslo had 0 fatalities several years back. And that's a city, I think roughly the size of Portland, Oregon, where I used to live before moving to Ithaca. So that's pretty significant. If a place like Portland had 0 fatalities in a year, you'd have to pay attention. And if you look at their story, there's plenty of articles out there about it. They took some pretty drastic measures. When we started Vision Zero here in Ithaca, or when I put it out to Common Council several years ago to ask them if they would jump on board and support Vision Zero, I got a direct question from somebody at Common Council, which was, if it takes shutting down basically most of the streets in the city, is that what we're going to do? And I said, well, it's really too early to tell, what we're going to do, what we have to do in order to achieve this goal. I think it's going to be iterative, but they really did, make a lot of changes in the world of parking and bike infrastructure in order to achieve that goal of 0. So with that, I'll just, when I heard about Vision Zero, I think it was 2014 or 2015, I was in Boston and they had newly adopted Vision Zero themselves. I was there for a conference and I didn't really know much about Vision Zero at the time. So I did a little research about, how impactful are traffic fatalities on our society. And if you look at any objective measure, it's sobering and surprising, even for somebody like me. I've been an engineer for 23 years and in transportation for a lot of that, but I hadn't really looked so specifically here. But this chart, basically the black squares there represent in different age groups where motor vehicle traffic crashes fall for the number of total deaths in the population. As you can see, I'll move to the next slide, between ages 8 and 24, it's number 1. And it's top 10 in just about every other age group out there. So, and even I looked locally here as we were considering Vision Zero, it's the 3rd leading cause of injury-related death, 4th leading cause of injury-related hospitalization, 5th leading cause for injury-related emergency department visits. So there's no doubt that just about anywhere you look in the United States, it's going to be one of the leading causes of death and injury in that community. So where we started, and I guess where I would recommend others do the same, I mean, it's different. When we started out here in 2018, started looking at this, there wasn't really any funding or anything available like Safe Streets for All is now. So I guess what I would say now, up until this point, I've said this is a good model to do. And I guess what I would say at this point is hire somebody else to do it for you, because there's money out there to hire someone else to do this for you. And it would take, you can make a lot more progress, but we're small and we were invested in this. So I spent a lot of time doing this analysis, which I think is going to help us with our Safe Streets for All grant. But looking at quantifying the problem, I think is very helpful to influence decision makers to say we're going to do something about it. Unless people know how big the problem is, it's hard for them to get behind it or care all that much. So we looked at 10 years and you can see here that basically, 15% of crashes involved in injury and about 1.5% serious injuries. Here in Ithaca, we're small, about 35,000 people, about 30,000 students. And we average a fatality probably every other year. So that's not a big number, but when you look at the number of crashes and the impact societally on what's happening here, it is significant. And then we made a series of charts. We really tried to look geographically at the city, use a lot of GIS to identify where the problems are. And the reason I put this chart up, this is looking at serious injuries during that 10-year period. And it's just helpful to see for our city, it does look like the problem is not that it isn't everywhere, but there are some areas where you could start. There's some low-hanging fruit. This illustrates that there is a cluster of where the problems are happening. And I think that's also helpful for decision makers to know we could focus our attention on some areas and probably make a difference. It's not just widespread everywhere equally. The other thing I'll mention is that, and this is consistent with what you find all across the country, is that while 3% of reported bike and pedestrian, 3% of all reported crashes are bike and pedestrian, 32% of serious injury crashes are bike and pedestrian. So obviously they're overrepresented. Now, it's a little bit difficult to say because also the number of pedestrian and bicycle crashes that get reported is generally underreported. So I think it's a little bit of both. It's probably some underreporting and the fact, obviously, when you've got vulnerable users involved in a crash, there's a higher likelihood of injury or fatality. But that's an area of weakness. I think there's a weakness of data with not reporting some of those crashes. I'm not going to go through all the charts, but I think what's helpful sometimes in identifying where the problem is, you look for outliers, and this is something where do we focus our attention first, where we can gain some momentum, make some changes. And what this chart here is, what percentage of our roadways are local roads, minor arterials, principal arterials, and then what percentage of our serious injury crashes and fatal crashes occur on those roadways. So you can see here that local roads make up 50% of the roadways, but 10% of the serious crashes, whereas minor arterials are 25% of the roads, make up 63% of the crashes. So there's an area, and principal arterials similarly. So the point of this is just that there's a place to start to try to make a difference. And then we've looked at movement type, left turning crashes. Not surprisingly, they're in conflict with opposing vehicles. So they're going to result in more serious injury crashes. So we really tried to break down, we have so many charts and so many different ways of looking at it to identify what's the low-hanging fruit, what kinds of crashes are resulting in serious injuries. And I will say, there's a system out there now from the DOT that's called CLEAR. There was I don't remember the name of the former system, but it has basically all the crashes that have been reported throughout the state. And if you're a municipality, you have access to it. And that's where we got all this information from. It's a free resource. And so it's very helpful to help to get to the bottom of your issues, to understand what's happening citywide. However, the caveat is, sometimes the information is not perfect. There's a lot of inconsistent reporting. And that's something on Ithaca, I think we hope to work on over the next few years, to work with our police department on how can we be more consistent in our reporting so we get more helpful, useful data. But that's difficult to do. But it's worth investing some time in, is one outcome of this. Just similar to the other slide I thought I'd mention here, when you're looking at registered drivers versus how often they're involved in crashes, the 20 to 29 age group here is disproportionately represented here. So again, maybe there's some specific outreach we can do to certain age groups to try to help some of the bulk of the problem. So I think where we are in Ithaca at this point, we've done some of these things, but there's plenty of unanswered questions that we're looking to find answers to. I'm an engineer, and I've given you lots of numbers here, and those numbers have a lot of meaning, but it doesn't really get to the human problem here, which is how are people's lives affected. When you look at a fatality, there's obviously an emotional toll that takes. I've had 2 people in my kind of somewhat extended family that died in motor vehicle crashes. So I know a little bit about what that means from a human perspective, but then also people that are severely injured, what does that look like for the rest of their lives? I think that's something that can get lost a little bit in this Vision Zero discussion. Are people forced to make unsafe choices? Do people have access to the ability to make safe choices, or are there barriers in place? That's something we're trying to take a look at. How does the built environment drive behavior? Moving to Ithaca 10 years ago for me felt funny because it's an isolated place, and I didn't know professionally what was going to happen for me moving to a funny place like Ithaca. It was a family decision. However, we've made the nice thing is about being in a town with Cornell is we've made some really interesting connections with some folks that are experts in areas that aren't civil engineers, like environmental psychologists. So we brought in some folks to really help us look at the problem in a different way and how people interact with the built environment. And so some of the other questions, are there patterns? I'll talk a little bit more about that. Patterns in the types of crashes. Are there barriers imposed outside the city on us that prevent us from making progress? And that's something that since we've started Vision Zero here has changed. There's a major change that probably many of you are aware of. I'll talk about that later. And then, COVID kind of brought up the question of exposure. If there's a reduced number of people out on the roadways, are we going to reduce crashes? And the overwhelming answer was no. We actually went in the wrong direction, even though there were less people driving. They were driving in a way that was less safe. But in general, reducing exposure, I think, is a logical idea. I just wanted to briefly acknowledge here some of the experts we've connected with over at Cornell, from environmental psychology to public health and epidemiologists, planning experts, folks from all over. It's really been great to collaborate. And I think that's going to help us in the long term. And these are some of the things we're coming out of that with is how do we predict where crashes are going to happen in the future based on where they've happened in the past. Now, one thing we found in Ithaca, I think, is because we're a smaller community, it's a little bit difficult to come up with good statistical models that are going to predict future locations. But I do think that's something on a statewide level, if it were analyzed, could actually yield some good results. So I'm hoping in the future there might be some movement in that direction. We're also looking to engage with some partners around the city that work with underserved communities to understand people's access to safe transportation. So that's something that's at the beginning levels, but it's kind of essential to this. Vision Zero is data driven. That was one of the 3 tenets that I put out there, but data can be lots of things. I've thought of it traditionally as one thing, but there's lots of conversational data that can be just as helpful as some of the numbers and charts that I sent to you there. Another area we're looking to dive deeper is to look at the ICD code. So actually go beyond the crash reports, and actually we've started some partnerships with the local hospital here to actually go through a little bit deeper into the medical, what we're allowed to access from the records. Because what happens on scene, what gets quantified or assessed on scene at a crash doesn't always end up being true in the long term when someone gets to the hospital. The extent of injuries can sometimes be different and more accurate later on. So we're looking to actually, and potentially some follow-up with folks that have been affected by crashes and how it's affected them in the long term. But I think this is an area, I know San Francisco has done a bit of this. They've probably done the best job of anybody so far. And I'll say to folks that want to go in this direction, it takes a lot of work to get there because obviously the information is sensitive, but we found enough different ways to get to the point where we can do it. So it is possible. People might often say that it's going to be difficult. It probably will be, but it is possible to get this information. And as I mentioned before, I just think as a civil engineer, I've been taught to think about design standards, and a lot of people that are doing Vision Zero have similar training to me, but bringing in folks that look at it in a different way, that look at the built environment and how people interact with it is actually extremely valuable. So it's, I guess, a lesson learned is to make your team as diverse as you can in their perspective on the situation or the problem that we're trying to solve. The other thing I'll just put a plug in to the idea of reducing exposure. The more that we can encourage folks to be using multimodal or to using public transportation, we're just going to reduce the number of people on the street. So that's a real effort for us to try to move in that direction, encourage people. It's interesting, in my role, I'm the director of parking and transportation, and that's very much on purpose here in Ithaca because they're always in conflict with each other, parking and transportation issues. And it's difficult to really make a lot of progress if you've got 2 different groups involved with that decision. But when you have one, you can work a lot more strategically, and I'll talk about that later. But getting people off of the network is a deliberate goal that we're trying to achieve. I just wanted to talk a little bit about speed limits and speed limit setting. As of a few years ago, there really wasn't a lot of, there was some laws in place that were pretty inappropriate, I think, for engineers like myself. There was really an inability to set speed limits that were appropriate. And that's been changed. And I'll talk a little bit more about it here. I still think there's a ways to go with that. I don't think we went quite as far as would have been great, but I think it's a move in the right direction. So I'll just speak briefly. A chart probably many of you have seen. When a pedestrian is hit by a vehicle and the vehicle is traveling at 20 miles per hour, 9 out of 10 pedestrians survive. And when that number goes to 30 miles per hour, it's 50-50. And then 40 miles per hour, it flips the script there, and 90% of people die. So speed obviously is got to be a huge area of concentration when you're talking about Vision Zero. And so I just wanted to point out, and there's been some studies in Boston, they went from 30 to 25. And there were some third-party insurance institutes that took a look at what happened. And the speeds really did go down, even in the absence of other countermeasures like traffic calming. It did actually, just the speed limit. I wouldn't recommend just making that one change, but it does have somewhat of an effect. And it is worth looking at. So, and you can see here, you know, around the world, especially with the metric system, it's more like people going from 30-ish to 20-ish. And it's really transformative, not only just from the standpoint of fatalities and injuries, but from a livability standpoint, from noise levels, even from literally the amount of rubber that ends up in the air from tires, you know, really has been quantifiably measured as less when you reduce speeds. You know, I remember an instance when we started our traffic calming program here in Ithaca. You know, everybody generally says, oh, everybody's going 50 miles an hour on my street. And that's usually, you know, not the case here. You've been to Ithaca. It's kind of hard to drive that fast here, but people have a perception. But one of the neighbors that I spoke with said, you know, you'll probably find that people are driving 30 miles per hour-ish on the roads, which is the speed limit, but it doesn't feel appropriate for our neighborhood. And I think you hit it right on the head. It's not so much that most people are speeding excessively. It's just the speed limits we have aren't really very livable or neighborhood friendly. So the good news is, as many of you know, this used to be the case that the vehicle and traffic law didn't allow area-wide speed limits of 25. 30 was the lowest you could go in cities and villages. And now that's been changed. So we can go to 25. I think 20 would have been better, but I understand that politically it was difficult to get that far. But I'm so pleased to see that. I mean, I gave a presentation similar to this several years ago at the MPO because I was trying to bolster interest in this topic and in making the change. And thankfully, a lot of people agreed and it did happen, which I can say some people in the know some years ago said to me, this fits under the category of important but boring, and it probably will never happen. But it did because enough people cared about it. And I think it will make a change. Now, one difficulty we're dealing with now is how do communities make this change? There was some language included there that an engineering study of some sort had to be done, which is a difficult thing to do for every street and every block in your city. So some of that's still being worked out. And then the DOT in the Albany office is coming up with some guidance, but it's a step in the right direction. And there's still some aspects that need to be investigated. Here in Ithaca, we have roughly 140 30-mile-per-hour speed limit signs that we need to change out. And the logistics of doing that is, you know, somewhat problematic, but it's going to be worth it in the long run. So I'll just end with saying what's on the horizon here for us and for everybody else. Safe Streets for All funding is the thing to pursue, because it's not only going to help people get a plan together, but it helps with implementation in the long run. There's quite a lot of money invested in this program. We received a $750,000 grant here just recently. And so we're doing ours more county, basically almost every municipality in Tompkins County is part of our team. So it's going to be really, and it's going to be all around the country. I think it's going to be very different than it ever was before, because Vision Zero has been very urban before. And I think what you're going to find is a lot of people partnering, partly because that was advantageous to even get the grant in the first place, to partner with other municipalities, but because it was finally an opportunity for more rural places to take these steps. But it's gonna take a mindset change, because the things that work in urban environments often don't work in rural environments too. So the consultants that are brought in to work on these projects will have to be a bit innovative. Another thing we're doing here in Ithaca is we have some carbon reduction funds that were available through our MPO. And so we're looking to get those funds and basically put together a concentrated effort on where sort of like a backbone of our biking network. Where do people really need to get to and from? How do we concentrate on how to get people to and from those primary points and do it in a safe and appropriate way? Because there's no more political issue maybe than reducing parking in favor of bike lanes. So what we're trying to do is pick our battles here and find locations where we're going to succeed, where we'll change some mindsets and gain some momentum in this area. So the idea is to say, we're not trying to do this everywhere, because what happens here when we want to pull off on-street parking in one street, we just hear from those neighbors. But if we're looking at citywide and getting a fuller perspective, I think it'll really help us make a case for doing this kind of work. And we're also working on citywide parking and transportation plans together in order to, like I said, address some of these issues that are always in conflict. What's our overall goal for parking and transportation, and where do we pick our battles to do the politically difficult things to do? And I already mentioned a bit about the citywide reduction implementation. So here's the obligatory slide with my contact information. Really feel free to contact me and talk it through, because it's something that I feel passionate about. And I think that it's an opportunity to really change communities for the better if we can move in this direction. So I'm really pleased to hear that it's something that Syracuse is going to do. And I'll just say one more thing. Sorry. I think about the worst thing you can do, though, is to say you're going to do it and then actually not follow through. There's lots of communities out there, and I won't name any by name, but it's been sort of a black eye. Some places said we're doing it, we're adopting it, and their numbers go in the wrong direction because they didn't really put their efforts into it. So I think, saying you're going to go in the direction of Vision Zero is definitely the way to go, but you have to figure out politically if you can really mean it before you go there. So thanks, everybody. Yeah, I'm happy to field any questions whenever that's appropriate.
All right. Eric, thank you. It's fantastic. You've been sharing presentations like this the last few years. I remember when you came to speak to our MPO at SMTC about Vision Zero, and specifically about the reduction in the speed limit law. So just want to say thank you to you also for pushing that and having that be part of your agenda, because ultimately it has helped all of us. So it is much appreciated. And I personally have just a quick question. You kind of touched on this a little bit, but you talked about back earlier with the data, and we've got the new clear system now. I believe it was ALIS before that we used through New York State DOT. But you did mention that hospitals have been willing to share some of that information with you. And I was just, you did kind of allude to this, but you did say it can be difficult, but they are willing to share some of that follow after information with you.
Yeah, we were fortunate because I mentioned one of the folks we were working with from Cornell, who's an epidemiologist. She happened to have a former student who was working in the healthcare system there and was in the right position. So we were able to start the conversations there. That helps. There's other ways to do it. But I think it was helpful to have an in. But yeah, just, yeah, there's so much. If I start talking about it, there's a lot of complications to it.
Well, I can talk to you about it
yeah.
offline sometime. Yeah.
But yeah, it's a real thing that I think it's a bit under studied to this point.
Got it. All right, let's see. We're going to, I think Megan had put a note here in the chat. I don't know if everyone has seen it. If you've got, there is a raise hand feature under reactions if you want to ask your questions, or you can actually raise your hand, and we can, if you've got your screen on, and we can see if anyone's got any questions or comments for Eric specifically. And just want to see if, let's see, there we go. You can see that a little better. Megan, do you see any? I'm not seeing any right yet.
Not seeing any raised hands. Okay, we have one in the chat. Eric, have you seen specific geography besides road type, like hill bottoms, positively associated with more crash risks?
Yeah, it's a good question. It is something that we took a look at, because Ithaca is a really, it's either, it's a really flat place and a really hilly place. There's not a lot that's in between. So we thought that taking a look at that would really help to understand. And we didn't really see anything on the hills that were actually more problematic from the standpoint of safety. So I think it could be a few things. Most likely, we're a small community, like I said, and it's hard to get good statistical information as we've sort of investigated that. Maybe that's not the way we're going to go in the long term. But the other piece is that, maybe people use extra caution on roadways that have challenging topography. That certainly could be the case. Like I've heard some people say, if you want to create a safe roadway environment, then make people uncomfortable, so they have to sort of pay attention, which there's a lot of wisdom to that, I think. And so we have some tricky terrain here in Ithaca that may require people to pay extra attention in some circumstances. But yeah, surprisingly, I really thought on hills, at bottom of hills, we would find. I mean, there's one specific instance, an intersection in Ithaca that has just about the highest crash rate, but it's not high number of crashes, but high crash rate. It's at the bottom of a hill where people run into a guide rail. And, you know, it's pretty obvious that we have but two of those locations. It's very obvious. But then again, it's less obvious how you address the issue. You know, it's a hill. There's only so much you can do about that. Just make the roadway, the whole point of safe systems approach is let's make the roadway system forgiving. So let's make that guide rail. Let's keep the speed low. Let's keep the consequences low.
Okay, and then Neil Burke asked, can you touch on the following items with examples from Ithaca? Physical interventions, policy changes, and outreach/educational strategies.
Yeah, good question. So let's see. So outreach and educational really there's not been too much in that direction so far. Well, and frankly, you know, like everything else, the money is on its way right now. So I think a lot of the progress is going to happen over the next year because we finally got some funding to really do this for real and hire some people to help us with it. Policy changes other than adopting Vision Zero, there's not been too much done. I'd like to see some changes to like our site plan review that would encourage more multimodal travel, to something that's going to incentivize people when they create developments to discourage a lot of single occupancy vehicle. That speaks to the idea of lowering exposure. So, and I can't remember what the third one was that Neil put in there.
Physical interventions.
Yeah, I think a lot of that's on the way too. We did go after a SMART grant, which would be pretty transformative for us, would really allow us to give the public transportation, give buses transit signal priority. And even we're actually looking at doing it for school buses as well. The idea is to, you know, give priority to buses at intersections. So we're going to not so much reduce their travel time, but reduce the variability for buses to encourage that and really kind of promote that in a public way that this is happening. Because I think the number one thing that, as someone who has ridden the bus quite a lot, it's the reliability of when that bus is going to come, not necessarily if you're going to shave off a minute or two, but can I rely on the bus to show up when they say that they're going to? And so that's one of the things we're trying to do. And then as far as physical implementation on the street, the other piece is through the grant we were looking at is to try to be able to respond more quickly to pedestrian and bicycle demand. We have a signal system in Ithaca that's very much fixed. It doesn't really react to demand. It doesn't, but we've been looking at some systems, and we went after innovations grant right before COVID, didn't get it, but would allow our traffic signals to respond to bicycles specifically. I mean, there are camera detection systems out there that can tell the difference between bicycles and cars and treat them differently. And I think that's pretty important when you're talking about a transportation system, to be able to do kind of what I just described for buses, to be able to identify bicycles, get them through, reduce delay, again, encourage that mode of transportation and make it safer. So we're trying to do some things on the technology side. I think some very practical things we haven't done, but just what I've seen in other places. One that's I think the kind of the heart of where I see some Vision Zero going is, I was in New York City last week, and they have these basically speed humps that they turn sideways and they put them along the center line of the roadway. So basically it discourages people from cutting a left turn early and from going over the center line of the roadway. It's this somewhat, you know, fairly aggressive speed hump that prevents you from wanting to do that. Because like I pointed out, left turn movements are the ones that here in Ithaca and probably in most places cause the most number of serious injury crashes. So if we can get people to change those behaviors while they're turning left, it's going to help. So that's kind of a long-winded answer with not a whole lot of substance to it, but those are the directions I think we're going to move, and the things that can reduce fatalities and have worked in other places.
All right, great.
Okay. Chris Robert asked, can you discuss how you have navigated removing parking that affects residents and businesses for bike and ped facilities?
Yeah, well, there's some funny stories. I won't get into this now, but I think I can think of several right off the top of my head. It's always difficult to do. So the question again was some specific examples of when we've done it.
Yes, like, yeah, how you've navigated, removing parking so that you can add bike ped facilities, like how has that affected residents and businesses? Yeah,
I think generally what I've found in working for a city government for a while is that when you do projects, there's a period afterward where people get right before and right after where people are really upset. And then after 6 months, things calm down. So if you can ride that storm out, then you're generally going to be okay. So, and if, for instance, two for instances here on Cuga Street, which is a major north-south roadway here, we removed parking from one side of the roadway. And there were some pretty drastic opinions on that at the time, and the project almost got shut down literally. I mean, as the folks were out there striping it, it almost got shut down, but it didn't, and it happened and everything was fine. And in the West End, coming into Ithaca, we did a project where we really transformed. We did put some green bike lanes in. We had a mid-block crossing that never existed. We put some different barriers in place. I can't go into all the details, but it was, and I give my colleague a lot of credit. He lives over there. He was on the listserv when they're tearing apart this idea of what we were going to do, but it's been transformative. It's not reduced. It's not increased delay. So I think the thing is, you just have to be willing to weather the storm, and maybe and be smart about where you, like I said before, about where you pick your battles. Try to find a place that's going to succeed and build some momentum from it, and also look citywide and look to gain momentum citywide instead of project by project. If you can have a plan and say, this is what we're doing, and this is going to be the overall impact on parking, and this is where it can go. The other tool I'll say, as a parking manager, also, there's tools out there to really quantify where existing parking occupancy is. There's some automated tools, license plate readers, all this kind of stuff. We've done some studies on roadways to say, this is the parking demand daily at these key hours throughout the day. And 1 block away, there's more than that amount of free available parking that's not being used. So we were able to quantify and say, this problem that is perceived is actually not a problem. And that was very helpful. I mean, some people, there's still an emotional component to it where some people don't accept that information. But I think a lot of people that came to our public meeting were surprised to see, oh, you know what, I'd only have to go another 400 feet to park my car. So yeah, data and strategic thinking and the ability to absorb criticism is probably the 3 keys. Yeah.
Not seeing anything else in the chat, and nobody else has their hands raised. Give it a minute while people are maybe you're typing in your question or trying to formulate your question. I did want to put in just a plug for our Centro's Exploring Tomorrow's Transit survey. Is still up and available, and we would love for more people to respond to that. So I'm going to put that into the chat. The survey link, I'm putting in the page of our website that has all the details about our Exploring Tomorrow's Transit public outreach effort that we're doing in Centro, and the link to take the survey is right at the top of that page. Please take that if you haven't done so already, and spread the word to any of your other networks to let people know that's out there. And if you're on our mailing list, keep an eye out, because we will be holding some open house kind of style meetings in late April, early May for this Centro outreach effort. So keep an eye out for that. If you're not on our mailing list, you can sign up on our website. We'll also post it on our social media. So just be on the lookout for that, and please respond to the survey if you haven't already. Okay, so, and we have a couple more in the chat. Maria Garcia asked, is a Vision Zero toolkit in development for implementing key strategies?
Is that a question for me?
Yes,
Or is that okay for you?
I
Okay.
believe,
I think
Yeah, yeah.
so,
Well,
or
yeah,
for
I think-
anyone that really
I
has.
didn't know if it was a Syracuse question or if it was a Ithaca question.
Um,
But I'll answer it.
yeah, Maria,
think
I
that's-
will send you a request to unmute if you want to clarify or type in the chat, but I was
Sure.
interpreting that as more of a general question.
Yeah. A toolkit. I think I'm not sure if that's the way that we're going to go. I mean, there's certainly some out there. There's some really good Vision Zero plans out there. I think the best one the one I like the best is from Denver, Colorado. I think they did a really nice plan some years ago. There may be some newer ones that are better. But I think there are some pretty good toolkits out there, but I don't know. I think they're really the maybe the best success is going to be when you're really taking a look at roadways, and it's hard unless you're looking at a roadway specifically for what is its dimensions, what does it have today, what is its drainage. I mean, that's the thing we want to do with this carbon reduction money, is actually do an in-depth design of basically several miles to say what are all the implications for this roadway, and just take the national information that's out there, what's appropriate treatment based on volumes of, traffic volumes and bicycle volumes. What's the appropriate treatment, but then how do you fit it into the space that you have? Are we going to move curbs to do this? Are we not? So I think toolkits are helpful, but honestly, the best are really just when you dig in and really actually look at each individual roadway specific. I mean, you can't do that for a whole city, right? So that's why we're looking at a backbone. And maybe toolkits are maybe appropriate for just other more residential neighborhoods. But I think when you're talking about the more major arterials, it's an in-depth sort of design, really.
So Maria just had another comment. She said, actually moving. Okay. Questions for anyone. New York City has one, but I'm asking for rural areas that are in conversation. So maybe, I don't know if you have specific examples for rural areas. And then also Joe Driscoll put in some comments, some resources. Joe, I don't know if you have a link to that, if that's something people can find online. Maybe you want to add that to the chat.
Yeah, I think the rural situation is an interesting one, because you've got roadways you've got counties that maintain, hundreds of miles of roadway, and with a totally different nature. I mean, when you've got a 55-mile-an-hour roadway, you're not going to put a speed hump on it. So what are you going to do? And I think that's really an unanswered question. I've not seen any, I mean, maybe they exist. I've not seen a lot of rural plans for Vision Zero type implementations, because I think people have said the traditional model doesn't really work too well. So that's an area now. There's all this money available. Maybe we're going to see a lot more progress in the rural communities than we ever did before. I hope so. But it is more difficult. And that's where, you see the higher speeds, and that's where you see a lot of fatalities. On the, when we were deciding here how we were going to partner and we wanted to push other entities to contribute, we said, well, where are all the fatal crashes? They're on the county and the state system. Sorry, Julie, I don't want to. But that's where they're happening. So, because that's where the speeds are high, but they're not rural. Yeah. Or they're not urban, I mean.
And Julie put into the chat a link to the NISDOT Pedestrian Safety Action Plan, PSAP, countermeasures. So thank you for that.
I do have a question that had comment that had come in prior to our meeting today. While we've still got you unmuted, Eric.
Sure.
It just says Ithaca's bike/scooter share program. Can you just talk about that for just a minute? You don't have to go into too much detail, but.
Sure. Yeah. And the folks who could tell you the best are Bike Walk Tompkins, and
Okay.
And they have a website, and they've been very instrumental in that. Well, they've really run that thing. They've got the grant to do it. And, we've had an interesting experience because we had Lime bikes several years back, and it was very successful. Actually, we had tons of rides, though I do question how many of those, how many vehicle trips were we replacing versus walking trips were we replacing with bicycle trips? I don't know. But it'd be interesting if you could quantify that a little better. But Line Bike then just went away. You know, I think we didn't fit their business model anymore. So they went away pretty abruptly. And so there was still, obviously, we knew there were lots of rides that were happening. We knew it was something the community would use. And so folks got together, and now it's a locally run bike share program. And so far, so good from what I understand, though I haven't seen a lot of data, but I think it's going well. And there's some, electronic assisted bikes, which in Ithaca is really huge, because getting, to Cornell and to and from Cornell is a big source of bicycle trips. And it's the most challenging place to go because of the topography. Yeah, I'm glad to see that. And of course, when they started some years ago, you couldn't, e-bikes were not legal, street legal, and there were all kinds of things. So I think and scooters, I think that was part of the question too. Scooters, we don't have at this point. I'm not sure what the plan is for that in the future.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Yeah, I want to follow that up with another question we had received ahead of today's meeting was, so in Syracuse here, Eric, we just, we have VO rideshare, which is now with us, and they're offering scooters as well. And someone had wanted to know when were they coming back for the spring, and they're out there now. So you can grab a VO scooter or bike. And I think I just saw I think Mario was showing me, Mario from our office. They just are going to be releasing some that have some ride assist as well. I think I just saw a link to that. I can find that though and share that with folks following the meeting. But so yes, VO is up and running for the spring, and go for it. So we've got that in there. All right, did I miss anything while I was chatting here, Megan? Anything else? Oh, thanks, Neil. In the chat, Neil Burke just provided a link to Syracuse VO Ride.
Oh, and that just prompted me to remember part of
Sure.
what Neil had asked about before, and because we had some of these conversations before. I can't remember if Syracuse has the ability to put in red light running cameras and automated speed enforcement. I feel like when we talked a few years ago, I think you guys already had permission to do red light running cameras, but not automated speed enforcement. But those are two tools that are out there. I think my opinion on them is that the red light running cameras are a mixed bag. People feel like they're a revenue source, but when I was in Portland, Oregon, I don't think they found that to be the case. And they do sometimes lead to more rear end crashes. So I think that's a little bit of a mixed bag, but I think New York City has had great success with automated speed enforcement. There's some limitations there because it's not, when someone's not issuing a ticket, there's less bite to it. There's not points on your license, and there's some issues around who's actually driving the car. It goes to the owner of the car. So there's some things there, but I do think they've been expanding their program, I think exclusively in school zones last time I checked, which is probably the most politically feasible place to start. And of course, with a lot of conversations we have around law enforcement today, I think there's probably a lot of room for automated enforcement to grow. So that's another tool that it's potentially really good for Vision Zero.
Great, thank you. Trying to see, Megan, let me know if you see anything else that came in, because I can go to some other questions that we received prior to the meeting today.
Nothing else in the chat. Nobody has their hand raised.
Okay. All right. I'm going to just move over to a couple of questions that we received ahead of today's meeting. One, and Neil, if you're still on, I'm going to put you on the spot with this, but there's a question if there's a plan for more or better bicycle parking downtown. We've got someone that usually ends up blocking their bike to a street sign. I don't know if the city's got any additional bike racks in the works here.
Yeah, we tend to add them in bunches. We tend to purchase in bunches. So it hasn't been a consistent capital project over the past few years, but we want to do more, especially where it's appropriate. We do have a good number out there. It's just, it can be a bit like parking a car. You might have to walk a block. So You know, we also been working with TNT. They've been doing a lot of more art focused racks, which are great, but not always obvious that it is a bike rack. So we're trying to work with them on honing in some of those designs. But yes, we want to expand our bike parking options. That's something that we do require of developments. So anytime you see, you know, one of these major developments going in the paper, you know, we push them really sternly on providing high quality bike parking. We always push for it to be indoors. We push for long-term, short-term, on top of what the city can roll out on our end. So we take a multi-pronged approach, and we intend for there to be more, not just downtown, but something that we're working on.
All right, thank you. One of the other things, I believe, Maria, you had a couple of questions that you sent us ahead of time, asking about comprehensive resources for street design standards, guidelines, and policies, enhanced crosswalks. I can send you a list of some of those standards, but there's some that road owners are required to follow. We've got the MUTCD, Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices. Excuse me, the HDM Highway Design Manual, and then New York State has their own supplements to each of those specific, I don't want to say guidance, but requirements. And then there's also other design standards that the state, the county, and the city look to. We've got what's called the AASHTO Design Guides. That's short for American. Oh, I'm going to mess up the acronym, but I can send that to you. And NACTO guidelines. But yes, there are definitely required specific requirements that road owners are needing to follow, along with some that are recommended. And then, but I will get you. I'll get a list to you, Maria. Let's see.
Peter asked, have any more social feedback or strategies stood out as very useful? I'm not sure if that's related to Vision Zero in particular.
Let's see. Peter, do you want to clarify what your question?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
I just mean, in your Vision Zero, you'd mentioned things like environmental psychology, which I'm just wondering, with all the Cornell insight and everything, if you had any particularly useful insights.
Yeah, I think the thing that's come out of it the most, I guess, is trying to like visually narrow roadways. I think is one direction we're trying to go, to make people feel a bit pinched in their ability to maneuver. I think that's one of the bigger things that's come out of that partnership, because then it's certainly better than changing a roadway when it's moving a curb when it's already established is a very difficult thing to do. I think the difficulty becomes there are some lower cost solutions to narrow roadways, make people feel less comfortable, but a lot of those also end up being ones that require a high level of maintenance. Like if you talk about we call them candlesticks, you might be familiar with what I'm talking about. They're great and they're low cost, but you have to have a pretty robust system to replace those things, because once they get encroached on, they're never quite the same. But I do think that's an outcome to me that said, how can we just make people feel like they shouldn't be traveling faster on this roadway, which sounds blatantly obvious, but it's a mindset thing.
Yeah, these things are playing out on Erie Boulevard, just from observing on a daily basis, where we started to install a lot of bike lanes there.
All right, I don't see any more questions or any hands raised.
I do have, you know, Megan, I do have a couple more that had come in ahead of time that I can address now here. There was a comment, or I guess a comment, to increase auto drivers' assumption that bicyclists share the road and what that means. One of the things that SMTC did a few years back was we had a series of bike safety ads that we had put out starting in May for Bike Month for Share the Road. And that isn't on our list of items to do at this point in time. However, if a member agency requested that we start those ads up again, it might be able to be something that we can do again or consider doing again. I also know that the 5-year statewide broadcast of Share the Road ended last year in 2022. And we don't know if the Governor's Traffic Safety Committee intends to still run that statewide or not. So I don't have complete answers to those questions that were asked, but I just wanted to at least address that.
Somebody asked what the candlestick is. Eric, I was assuming you mean like the vertical delineator posts.
Yeah.
They're like
That's
a tall, skinny plastic post with a weighted bottom. See if I can find a picture of one online.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
The movable ones, right? Like there's ones that can actually be installed that like latch into the road, but then there's ones on a movable base.
Right. And they can be nice for like shorter sections of implementation for, let's say, like making a separated bike facility, because a real challenge we have in Ithaca here is pretty much every street we have is a residential street with lots of driveway cuts. So doing protected bike lanes is especially challenging here. We don't have a lot of roadways where you could just have a continuous barrier for a while without preventing people, from being able to access their driveway. So I've seen in Portland where they've used these for like smaller sections in between driveways, and I think it can be effective. It's still accomplishing the same goal as like a continuous barrier, but they don't last.
All right. Trying to see Megan. Give me 1 second here.
That's okay.
Oh,
And I'm
you
sorry.
were ahead.
I put in a link to some delineator posts online, but I kind of put it in the wrong thread. So that ended up an answer to Derek's question, which was really Bike Month was mentioned in the City of Syracuse report. When is that, and how can local groups get involved? So Bike Month is in May. I'm not sure about the question about how can local groups get involved in that. I'm not sure that there's an organized activity going on. And Julie mentioned, yes, that candlestick type delineators are on Towpath Road in DeWitt along Empire State Trail.
Going back to Maria, you had another question here about sharing a Vision Zero toolkit, which I think we addressed. Intersections, slow zones, schools, parking lots. Maybe I'll put my email address in the chat, Maria. It sounds like you have some really specific questions, so I think that we could talk all day about that in there. So you and I can chat separate from that. And then Jamie Reppert, you had mentioned too, protected lanes on automobile routes, lockup areas, battery powered modes using paved trails built for human powered modes. As far as that goes, battery powered modes, there are some legal issues with e-bikes, and speaking with some of our member agencies, that's still a little bit unclear as far as what's allowed. And we have definitely talked about it in our MPO group statewide. We're not really able to answer that on the spot today, but that's really still kind of in flux. I don't have the answer for you as far as on trails specifically. That may be a locally administered type of ruling or law, but again, I don't have any answer to that for you right now. We'll see what we can drum up on that for our next meeting. Let's see here. there's anything else that I missed. Another comment / question that came in was Liverpool Village is updating its master plan to ensure pet and bike safety. As Onondaga Lake Park in New York State DOT and county DOT plans impact those. And let's see. And I've got one final question here that came in, and I'm not exactly sure who to direct this to. Might be a question for Neil, or it may be a question for some central folks that we don't necessarily have here with us today. But can improving active transport access and safety around bus stops improve bus options in Syracuse, as in how and where? So that's a full question. And I have a feeling we'll have to pass that one along and get some answers to that.
Yeah.
Do you have something? Oh, go ahead.
I can add to that. I do know, as part of our of the Exploring Tomorrow's Transit effort, we are doing, Centro is looking for some feedback on where people would like to see bike share locations outside of the city of Syracuse, because they are working with VO to expand bike share outside of the city. So that's one of the questions on our survey. And as they move towards implementation of bus rapid transit, they're really envisioning those BRT stations to be multimodal and include opportunities for bike share, include bike racks, include better opportunities to get there on foot. So I think the short answer is yes, improving active transportation access to bus stops will encourage more people to use transit. And I think that is something Centro is thinking about as well.
Thank you. Thanks, Megan.
Yep.
We are getting really close to the end of our time here. If there's any last minute questions, if you could get those in right now. Otherwise, we've got to, I do want to point out that our next meeting, we're due for a meeting in June of this year. So that's another couple months from now. So if anyone has any ideas for topics or anything specific you want to chat about, if you could let us know. We're going to be sending out, actually Megan just put it in the chat, an evaluation form. And we ask the same questions at the end of every meeting. It helps us kind of keep track of how we're doing and what's going on. And then I also am able to create a list of topics that we may want to present on at future meetings. So if there are any ideas, if you could please take a minute as you exit the meeting today and fill out the evaluation form, it is much appreciated. I again want to thank you, Eric, for your time. Thanks for taking the time to visit with us today and share your insight and your knowledge. We really, really appreciate it. And I hope to have you back soon to give us some fun updates when the time is right for you and for Ithaca.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. And also thank you to our member agencies. Thank you to Julie. Thank you to Chris. Thank you to Neil for spending the last hour and a half with us. It's much appreciated, and for the updates. And Neil says thank you as well, Eric, taking the time to share your experiences with us. So it's much appreciated. Megan, have I forgot anything?
No, I think that we covered it all. So
okay, wonderful.
Watch out or watch for information about our next meeting, which we said will probably be in June, and take the Centro survey.
Yes, please do. And I'll follow up with you directly, Maria. And I think that's it. I think that's a wrap for today.
Thank you.